All right, hey everybody, in this video we're going to be creating a simple PHP website that connects to WordPress via WP OAuth Server. Just want to note in this video that we are using WP OAuth Server Pro. However, you do not need to. You can go over to wordpress.org and use the community version for this. If you would like to support the project, you can get 50% off by using the link in the description of this video for WP OAuth Server Pro, and you can follow along exactly with us. Before we begin, I just want to give context to the project. We are going to be creating a PHP website at the local host or local domain of php-auth-example.local, and we have WordPress installed at wordpress.site. We are using MAMP Pro for this, so that's how we have local sites here. And wordpress.site is where we have WP OAuth Server installed. What we need to do before we begin really is we have some information already, and we already have a plan in place. We're going to hop over here to our editor, and we're going to have two files, and our editor is currently looking at our PHP website. It's generic. We have two files. We have index.php and we have callback.php. These files will handle all the logic for us and display back to the user basic information. So the callback PHP is the one where we're going to have all our logic basically that's communicating with WP OAuth Server. And the front end is going to have some logic basically to check to see if a user's logged in. It's also going to provide some functionality such as a login button as well as a logout button. So we're going to have to do a few things here before we get started. The first thing, just to get it out of the way, is we're going to create a client in WP OAuth Server. So let's head back over here to our browser. Go to WP OAuth Server setting page, and we're going to go and we're going to add another client, and this one's going to be called PHP example, and the redirect URL is going to be the domain name of our PHP site, and in our case we have a callback file, callback.php, where all our logic's going to be at. And we're just going to ensure that authorization code is checked. If you're using the community version, then all the rest of the grant types will be grayed out. If you want to pick up the pro version, use the link down in the description for 50% off at wp-oauth.com. The community version does work with this, so just ensure that the authorization code is checked and go ahead and click Create Client. Now that the client is created, we have some information here that we are going to use later on when we're developing our PHP script. Specifically the client ID and the client secret. So we don't need to do anything else here with WordPress just yet. So we're going to hop back over to our PHP site and hop into the editor and take a look at what we got here. So we have a standard HTML5, nothing crazy. This is just HTML with the title, my PHP OAuth example. Welcome to my website, and that's what we have here is just this. Now we're not really going to cover anything about OAuth or the HTML specifically because that's pretty basic stuff, and if you're watching this video you're probably interested in just on how to create the logic in PHP to create the connection. So we may cruise through certain parts of this. However, I am going to walk through parts. I'm going to split this video up into chapters, so you should be able to follow along with the slide bar and kind of move back and forth to where you need to. All right, so we do know that this site is going to have sessions. So first off, we're going to need to create a session. So up top at the very beginning, before there's any white space, let's go ahead and just throw in our generic session start just to kick things off. And then our user session is going to be using sessions. So let's just say we need some logic to check to see if the user's logged in with PHP. So is logged in, equals is set session, and let's just say user. Let's just say user. And then we're going to say true, false, right? Really doesn't matter. We could, that's pretty shorthand, but it'll work. All right, so now that we have our isLoggedIn session set, we're going to need to use this logic to display logic down here to the user. If they're logged in, we're going to show them a log out button. If they're logged out, then we're going to show them a logged in button. And to do this, I recommend using a form to do this. Just it's easier to handle the GET request, just because there is a lot of parameters. However, you can build a long URL as well. We're not going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to have basic logic here, so wrapped, and it's going to be in a way that we can include HTML without printing new lines. So we're going to say if is locked in, and then we're just going to do shorthand, else, and if. Alright, so this is shorthand. So inside of here, we're going to say if they're logged in, let's say welcome, and then we're going to have a link for them to log out eventually. So let's create a anchor here, and we don't know what it's going to be yet, but we do know we need to have it in here. If they're not logged in, we're going to need to give them a login button. So let's do that by creating a form with hidden inputs. So we're going to create a form here, and then the action is going to post to our WordPress website authorization endpoint. So our WordPress site is wordpress.site. So we'll just go over here and copy that, go back in here, and the endpoint to authorize for WP OAuth Server is OAuth/authorize once it's installed. And don't forget the trailing / WordPress likes to do redirects, which causes headaches when you're working with this logic, because it is redirecting by nature too, so you can get all kind of confused when it starts redirecting. So we're going to create this form here. All right, and inside this form, we're going to have an input type hidden, because we don't need it. We're going to say name and value. Oops. I promise I'll get it here eventually. There's going to be a couple of them, so we're just going to copy this. And then the first one, we're going to put a state of 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a scope of basic, because we only want basic information back. We're going to put a response type. Response type is going to be code, and client ID is in the editor, or the OAuth settings, the client settings, and we're going to do a redirect URL, and the reason redirect URI, not URL, URI. All right, so the reason that I didn't do this is just because I wanted to copy and paste this. So the redirect URL is going to be the redirect URL from our settings in WP OAuth Server and our client settings. So our redirect URL needs to match for security reasons. All right. And we need to grab our client ID. So we're going to take this, we're going to take it and copy it. and put that in here. Actually, I should probably fill that in. Client ID. All right, we're going to give it a button. So it's going to be a button type submit, and it's going to say log in using SSO, or just single sign on. All right, well, let's see what happens when we show this now. So it's saying if you're not logged in, show this button. So when we click on this button, you'll notice that the users redirect back here to callback. So let's do something. Now that we're here in this site, now that we're not done here. So let's do something real fast. Let's open up another browser. We're going to open up Brave, and you can use any other thing, Firefox, and in Brave we're going to visit our site. And the reason we're doing this is because we're not logged in on another browser. If I can get this to copy in here. All right, there we go. All right, so we have Brave here. We're not logged into anything, and what's going to happen when we click on this button, it's going to take us to our WordPress site and ask us to authorize. So our admin information, and then when we log in, you'll notice that after a successful login, it's going to redirect back to our redirect URL with a code in the URL. The code's right here. So now what we have to do is we have to handle the logic of communicating back with the server. And basically everything we need right now is we're done with index.php. We're going to hop over to callback.php, and we're going to start working with that. So at the top, we're going to open up our PHP bracket, and we're going to start our session, because we need to set our session after the callback is done. Session, that's not how that goes. Session start. All right. Now down here, this is where we're going to take some information so we don't have to keep on writing it over and over again. And we're going to put it in some variables. So here we're going to set the server URL, the client ID, the client secret, and the redirect URL, all in parameters here in PHP. So we're going to set the server URL. The server URL is http wordpress.site, no trailing slash. The client ID for our client is, I'm not 100% positive, but we'll hop back over here into our WordPress site and grab our client ID. We're also going to add the client secret. Secret, if I can spell. We're going to head back over to WordPress and grab that too as well. All right, and we also need to add our redirect URL, so we don't have to keep on typing it. Redirect URL. And our redirect URL is also in here. And in this case, it happens to be the same file that we're working on. So in the callback.php. Alright, so here in our handler, we need to listen for code. If you recall, it redirected us back to callback.php with a code parameter. This code is something that WordPress OAuth Server will send back. It's a short-lived token just to kind of double check the authentication. This code is going to be used to request an access token. So what we need to do in our callback file is we need to listen for that code parameter. So with that logic, we're just going to say is set get code. Right, so this is saying if the code parameter is in the URL, then run this block of code, everything inside. And then we can, just for giggles, we can say print get code just to make sure that we have it. Eeks. And we'll head back over here to Brave. You know, there's our code right there. All right, so with the code, we need to now use that code to request the access token from WP OAuth Server. To do that in PHP alone, the easiest way that I suggest is to use curl. So we're going to use curl, and we're going to set up our request to send to the server to get back an access token. Now, please keep in mind that this is, you can look this information up on how to use curl and information. We're going to type it out, so if you know what you're doing, you can skip ahead and we'll just review our section of code as we go. So here we're going to create the parameters for our curl. So curl params, which is going to be an array in this instance. All right, so we need to send our grant type. Our grant type is going to be, sorry, I can't type today. Authorization code. There we go. We're going to add another parameter called code. Code is going to be the code received in the URL. We need to provide a redirect URL again. So redirect URI is going to be the redirect URL that we created up top. Our client ID that we created earlier, and our client secret. And that should be good for our parameters. Let's go up here and clean up some code. All right. Now we need to set up our curl request. So let's just do a generic curl, and then we're going to initiate it. Oh man, this is a new keyboard, and it is very... So first parameter we're going to pass is the server URL. Actually, that's going to be the only parameter we pass because we need to point to our endpoint. So our endpoint for an access token in this case is going to be OAuth-token. So this is where the curl request is going to go. So it's going to use our server URL OAuth token. So our server URL is right here, and then we're just appending OAuth token to the end of it. Now we need to set up the rest of the parameters in the curl request. To do this, we're going to use curl opt or set opt, and the first parameter we're going to do is tell it that we do want the request to return. Return transfer true. We're going to do curl. Oh man, set up. The next one we're going to do is we're going to tell curl to post to this endpoint. Post is also going to be true. All right. The next one is going to be the post fields that we're posting, which happens to be the curl parameters. So curl opt post fields, and then we're going to pass the parameter of curl params. All right, curl set opt. In development cases, we may need to turn SSL verification off just because of local development. So in this case, we are going to turn it off. However, I do not recommend turning this off in any development scenario. So verify, and we're going to tell it to verify, not verify anything. All right. Now, the next one we need to do is add a user agent, because the OAuth server looks for a user agent, and we need to send that in order for it to work. So curl opt user agent, and here you can basically put whatever you want. My browser, but I am going to actually add in just a generic user agent, and you can look these up on the internet. And the last one is the refer. So we're going to do curl opt curl opt referral, and here we're just going to put our domain. So it's actually this little piece right here. You could technically put the redirect URL in here. Let's do that, just so we don't have to type as much, because typing is not my forte today. All right, now we have the curl set up. The basic setup instructions for curl, we need to tell it to execute. So for this, we're going to call it code response. Curl execute, and it needs to execute the curl. All right, and now we need to curl close and close the connection. All right, so the next step into this is to parse the data. We are looking for JSON data to be returned in this, and to do that, basically we're just going to tell PHP to decode the JSON. So the token, we're going to say token info equals JSON decode, and it's going to decode the code response. All right, so it's going to put it, basically PHP is telling it to take it from a string JSON. It's not JSON, it's JSON. Take it from string JSON to object JSON. I apologize. Throughout this entire thing, I was wondering why that was barking at me. We forgot to add the object in here. So we're going to add it right here. There we go. That's definitely better. All right. And just for giggles, what we're going to do is we're going to just dump this information just to make sure, see what we got. And if this works successful, we should have an access token returned. We're going to need to go back to the beginning. Click on this. And as you see, we have an access token. So it's 40 characters. It's a string access token here. We have our expires in. We have our token type. We have our scopes, refresh token as well. So the next thing we need to do is take our access token, and we have to get the user information from it. I guess one thing that I'm going to do before we go any farther is, I know that the token information is coming through. We can do error handling here, basically check for any errors. We're not going to do that just yet. Actually, no, we are going to check for errors. Let's check for errors. It's just good practice to check for errors. Even though this is not meant for production, we still should go through the process of checking for errors, especially when we're dealing with authentication stuff. So let's just check for errors. I'm going to check to see if the token info has an error. For WordPress OAuth Server, it sends an error back for the first parameter. And it also sends an error description. And what we're going to do is we need to handle this error properly. And to do that, really, we're just going to push the error to the front end so we can use it. We're going to push it through a parameter. So what we're going to do is basically build out an error redirect. So when the user clicks the button on the front end and there's an error, we can display the error message on the front end rather than stopping the script in the middle. So the error redirect is going to be our main site. Let's add a parameter to it, say error or login error. Why not? Login error equals token info error. So it also sends an error message of error description. It's a little bit more descriptive and a lot easier to handle and read. All right, so if there's an error in this response, we're telling it we're going to redirect back to the page, but currently we're saying let's build it redirect with our main site login error, and then return the error description in the URL and the parameter of error login. The next thing we need to do is create a redirect. We're going to use generic redirects in PHP. Do location, and then let's do this. We're just be very simple here and do error redirect. And force of habit, just in case this fails, I always exit out. So now if there's an error, so let's force an error. So we know what happens when it's successful. We get an access token. Let's force an error and see what happens. To force an error, I'm just basically going to pass a bogus client ID, add some dashes to the end, and then we're going to force an error. And our error should actually redirect back to the home page with a parameter in the URL. There we go. Login error, the client credentials are invalid. And then we could display that here. We're not going to do that just yet. Actually, let's do that. Oh man, the wonders, right? So here we go. We're going to say just generic if it's not empty, because we don't want it to display if it's empty, right? So if it's empty, get login error. There's no, the reason I'm using this type of logic shorthand/this is just because I don't want to really chat and type too much. Let's see here. We're going to put in here, I don't know. Let's do strong, completely not right in the syntax. And then we're going to, and this is where it's important to sanitize information, because if somebody was to get this information, they could print JavaScript on the screen and redirect somebody. But for this case, we're not going to really worry about that. And we're going to do this. Now, if we head back, there should be an error message that pops up. The client credentials are invalid. So that's just giving you an example of how to handle that. Let's head back over into our callback script and get rid of this information. And we're just going to double check it one more time, which should give us our access token. All right, so next thing we need to do is we need to handle the access token. The access token is basically saying that the user has authenticated and authorized the use of this website to use their data, and the access token can then be used to reach out and request the data from the server about that user. So that's what we're going to do now. So the next step is to check and see if there was an access token, because we only want to process it if there is one. So if the token info, actually let's say if it's is set, token info access token, we're going to set our session, set this information into a session for later use. And the session variable we're going to use is token. Alright, so token equals token info. And we're just going to store the entire thing in there so we can use it later. Now we need to build out another curl request. However, I'm not typing that out again. We're going to use this as a template here to pull down and just kind of modify. So we're going to take this other curl and copy it, and we're going to paste it right in. So right here is our old data. Now there is a few differences to the curl request that we do need to make, and the main ones are what we're about ready to cover. So to request the user information using the access token, the easiest way to do that is use the access token in the URL. And what we're going to do for that is we're just going to say OAuth, and then we're going to hit the endpoint for the user, which is me. Don't forget the slash, because WordPress has issues and redirect issues when you don't use slash correctly for them. And then we're going to pass the parameter of access token directly in the curl request, just like so. And let's go ahead and just pass the access token. And the reason why we're using an object here is because we know that the object, which is token info, has all this information in here. So access token, so all we're doing is passing this value to our me request. All right, so in the next one, the return transfer, we need it to be true. The post is going to be false. We're not going to be posting. And the next one, we're actually going to get rid of completely, the post fields, because we're not posting anything. The verifier we're going to keep as false. Again, this is development only. Do not use this in production. The user agent we're going to keep the same, and the referral we're going to keep the same. So basically we don't have to write this stuff out again. Alright, so now let's handle this information, this curl request. So let's say user data response, create a variable, is curl execute, and then we're going to tell it what to execute. Alright, now always remember to close it out. Now let's handle the user information. So if is set we actually, before we can move farther, we need to handle the request. So user info will contain the information returned from WordPress. So user info, and then again we're going to JSON. I don't know what's going on. JSON decode the user data. So the user data response. All right. So now we have our response in JSON. Now we can go into checking. So we're going to say if is set user info, and then we're going to check for the ID, because the ID comes back as a parameter. All right, we're going to create a session, and we're going to store the user information in a session called user info. So session user info equals user info. We're going to store the entire object in that session. Now we're going to, now that we have the session set here with user info, and if you recall, that's what we had here. Actually, you know what? Let's change it here. We have to make sure these match. So we're going to be checking for the session user info, true or false. So we need to set that here. So now we have an access token, we have the user information, and we're going, and we did set the user info with the user info. So our logic on our front end is now going to say that they're logged in. To the user, we need to use the location, which is a redirect header, and we're going to redirect back to our main site. And as always, I like to do exit. Now, there's a couple things that we need to do here. What if the information comes back as an error? Well, to do that, just in this case, it's generic. We're just going to exit out if the user ID did not come back, and we're going to say there was an SSO issue. Don't diverge too much information, especially when you're dealing with errors like this. All right, so now let's go and check what's happening here in our block of code. So our callback PHP file is being used to listen and handle the logic for the initiation of single sign-on. So when this file is hit, it starts a session. We create variables that we need throughout the script. We're checking to see if there's a code variable in the parameter. If there is, then we're going to use that code to request an access token. So this is what this is doing right here. It's requesting an access token, hitting the access token or the token endpoint, saying we want an access token. Here we're checking to see if there was errors, which would stop and redirect to the front end. Assuming if we get this far that there's an access token, we're checking to see if there's an access token. If there is, store that token in a session variable, and then use that access token to do another curl request to request the user information from the server. And then here we're saying if the user info comes back and the ID parameter is set in the object from, if the ID is given to us from WP OAuth Server, then let's go ahead and start a user info session that we can then check to see if a user's logged in on the front end. Here we are redirecting back to the home page, which then should pick up the logic of the user info and tell us that we are logged in. So fingers crossed, see if this works. See if this works. So ideally, if we hit this button, it should log us in and then redirect us back to the home page, and it should show us welcome with a logout button. nothing ever works the first time. So, okay, now it did work. It's showing that we're logged in, and it's giving us a logout button. We need to use the information that we got to see what users logged in, what their info is. You know, it's not good to see if they're logged in if we can't use their info. And here we're going to use the variables in our session user info to say and call them out. So we're going to say we want to say welcome John or welcome whoever. We're going to use display name in this case. So welcome, and then our session, we're going to tap into our user information right into our session. So user info, and it's still an object, so we're going to say display name. Now the fields that are returned from WP OAuth Server are your standard metadata fields that are in WordPress for the most part, and we can check those by using the var dump or the print r feature, which we will do here in a sec, to show us all the variables that we have access to. So now if we're logged in, it's going to say welcome and then the display name of the user. So if we reload this, it should say welcome admin. All right. So the admin, me, from WordPress is now logged into PHP auth example. And we're just using standard generic sessions. They should never be used like this in production. But however, this is just explaining the process. So what about some of the other information? Well, we'll get to that. Here, right below this welcome thing, let's just do paragraph, why not? And then here, we're going to do some cheating, and we're going to print all the user information. So let's do print R here, just so it's more friendly. So print R, and then we're going to dump the session for the user info. And this should give us an object in code format right below welcome. So it's going to give us all the fields that we actually have access to. So here you can see that this is the information WordPress provided me. I got the ID, I got the user login, got the nice name, email, user registered, user status, and display name. You can tell WP OAuth Server to send more info. You can tell it to send less info. You can tell it to send custom info if you want. However, this is just showing us the information that we have to work with. So knowing this information, we could then create an account for that user when they logged in for the first time. We can check the email versus an email in our PHP database, in our MySQL database, or whatever database we're using. And if it exists, then we can log that user in. If it doesn't exist, then we can create that user and then log them in. However, we're not using databases for this. We're just using standard sessions. We do need to figure out how we can log out though, right? So in generic PHP sessions, they're managed by the session. So on the front end, you'll see that we're using the global variable of session to store information to check if the user's logged in. If they hit the logout button, we need to capture that they want to log out, and we need to destroy the session. So to do that, it's actually relatively simple, and the easiest way to do this is to go right below the session start and check for that logout parameter, or check for a logout parameter. So we're going to say if is set get logout, and we're going to be looking for a logout parameter in the URL. All right, we're going to destroy the session, so session destroy, and then we're going to redirect back to the main page, and you can redirect wherever you want. And again, I have a habit of just doing this just in case the header doesn't work. All right, So before we can hit that logout URL, we need our user to be able to get there user-friendly. So what if they click the logout button? So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to say that they do it now. So log out, and then it could just be true or any parameter. It really just could say log out and it would work. So now if the user clicks this, it's going to go to this site with the parameter logout, and it doesn't really need to be true. It could just say logout. All right, so let's go check this script. Now you'll notice down in the bottom it says logout equals true as a parameter. If we click this, we should destroy our session and it should give us a login button again. And there you go, it gives us a login button. So one more time, if we click this, click to log in, it's going to welcome admin and pull everything back up, and we can log out. Now, I know that this was very basic setup. It can get very complicated, but this is just a generic way of doing this in PHP. I'm going to have these files available down in the description section, so you're more than welcome to go download them too as well. I do appreciate it. I know this video was long-winded. For you guys that stuck around to the end of the video, you guys get 60% off WP OAuth Server. For you guys that have stuck around to the end of this video, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, you can post them down in the comments below and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. For you loyal watchers out there, you guys receive 60% off WP OAuth Server. I'm not putting it down in the comments because you had to watch this entire thing. You can head over to wp-oauth.com, and then during checkout, use the promo code I watched your video. No spaces, all lowercase. I watched your video. And that will give you 60% off of WP OAuth Server. And until next time, stay safe.